Welcome to Platform Diaries with Shane Williams, where each fortnight you'll hear the stories of industry veterans and learn the secrets to sustainably amplifying value from your software platform investments.
If everyone is moving forward together, then success takes care of itself. A quote from the late Henry Ford. Welcome to the first in a two-part series on how mature technology companies integrate platform teams into their broader engineering capability. You're listening to Platform Diaries, and I'm your host, Shane Williams. My guest today is Jason Van Lint, Head of Delivery at Flybuys. We discuss structuring teams around mission in order to deliver value, managing capacity and skills across teams, and Jason's top 3 tips for approaching an agile transformation. I trust you'll enjoy the interview. So Jason Van Lint, welcome to Platform Diaries.
Well, thanks very much, Shane. It's good to be here.
Now, today's topic that we want to talk about is a topic that I actually didn't touch on as deeply in the book as I'd like to go to today. And that's, I talked in the book about how to blend platform teams with a system integration partner and how to get the best out of that relationship in terms of velocity and capacity and so forth. But what we didn't talk to was how a platform team fits into a broader ecosystem of an engineering group, and then how that engineering group is structured in order to deliver value. So I thought I'd love to kind of touch on that today in terms of what are some of the lessons you've learned through your career around how we structure teams to deliver value and what that might look like, and some of the things you're doing in your most recent role. But before we get to that, I always like to start the conversation with a little bit of just introducing the guest. And so if you wouldn't mind doing me a favour, just for the benefit of our listeners, perhaps tell us a little bit about yourself and your career journey and how you ended up landing at Flybuys.
Well, I'm recently a new addition to the Flybuys team. I've been there for about 3.5, 4 months. I moved there from realestate.com, where I went through a variety of delivery roles, I guess, for about 3 or 4 years. A couple of those years were as a contractor, and for the last 2.5 years as a permanent. And before that, I was working sort of in the professional services kind of consulting game for a small company here in Melbourne. And before that, I was working for a multinational in Europe for 18 years. So one of those career people who kind of just decided, nah, that's it. I think I'm going to move back to Australia, and sort of rebooted my career working predominantly in tech companies. I mean, I've always worked with organizations with a tech focus. My role was tech focused, but since coming back to Australia, I've really been able to explore roles that are embedded inside organizations that consider themselves to be tech companies first. So that's been really good.
And that probably leads us into today. So prior to this podcast, we were having our sort of pre-podcast conversation, and you mentioned, we were talking about a bit of a transformation that you're working on at the moment, or have been most recently working on. And perhaps just to set the scene a little, would you mind telling us a little bit about some of the drivers or the motivators for that org design?
Yeah, it's a good one. I think the changes that we've been making have been predominantly to address the fact that a lot of people haven't been happy with the way the organization has been delivering. And it's been mainly around a feeling of lack of control. I think that teams feel like they haven't had a lot of control over their own destiny, some of the decisions about what gets delivered, how it gets delivered, when it gets delivered. There was a big feeling about, these decisions get made for us in some sort of arbitrary black box and then just handed to us to execute on. Then there was also the fact that we were borrowing and stealing people from other teams to help other teams to make deadlines that may or may not have been reasonable or unreasonable. So there was a bunch of kind of issues that were just leading to general discontent. And I think, that was echoed in when we reached out to the organization and asked people to share with us their problems. The common one always was like, I feel like we're being asked to deliver on things that we might not necessarily bought into to begin with, if we'd even been consulted to begin with. So the CTO of Flybys is new as well. He joined about a week before I did. And we got together as a tech LT team and then decided, what we really should be doing is structuring the organization more in line with sort of some of the tech companies that we've seen where it's been very successful at. And REA is one of them. The CTO comes from Seek. And it gave me an appreciation for how far companies like realestate.com have come along on their journey. You know, they've had 20 years to sort of get this right. They were early adopters of Agile. And now it's kind of morphed even within REA to their own kind of style of Agile, which is great, right? This is the sign of maturity going along this journey. And the real appreciation I had is that, you know, you'd be working. And in fact, when I was in REA, I was delivery manager for a platform team. So a number of systems that were categorized as platform. And I don't think I really had an appreciation for the interplay between platform and all these vertical teams that are delivering on business value, you know, and where the different engagement models between those two really make a difference. So really to answer your question, the genesis for doing this is really to address developer unhappiness or team unhappiness in the way that we were structured and making it more on lines of successful models we've seen before. And in fact, this kind of model that we're adopting where you have vertical streams that deliver on business value or against OKRs to the business and platform teams that support them sort of going horizontally is not something radically new, right? There's books like Team Topology that talk about this. But, you know, it seems to be a pattern that works very well for organizations who want to embrace Agile.
So interesting you mentioned the book Team Topologies. I'm actually a pretty big fan of Matt and Manuel's work and how to apply that in organizations. So if that's an influence over the way you're doing things, that's quite interesting. I wouldn't mind exploring that if you don't mind. But maybe we'll step up a level to begin with. You talked about aligning around a mission or and you mentioned KPIs. Perhaps we could kind of, without getting into the intricacies of the business's particular KPIs, but just more generally, how does that work out? So you know, if you got a sort of a clear annual goal that you were going for, or is it more of a, hey, you know, we're deciding those goals ourselves? How does that kind of play out from a business perspective into how the teams are thinking about what they need to deliver? Yeah,
so OKRs are also something new that we're introducing. And the first thing we did was we encouraged the executive leadership team to develop OKRs first. So what are the kind of drivers that you want to see move? What are the things that we need to move in order to make a successful business, to realize successful business value here? So they came up with 6. And of course, these OKRs need to be, I guess they need to be specific enough in that they mention a key result, which you need to move by X amount of percent. So there has to be a kind of measurement aspect to it. But they also need to be general enough that when you cascade them down into the various parts of the business, they have activities that they can relate to one of these OKRs, right? So a really good one that's quite generic is like, you know, we, as a business, we want to reduce operating costs by X percent, right? That's a good one that can actually, whether you're in tech, whether you're in procurement, whether you're in finance or somewhere else, there is something in that OKR for everybody. And then what tends to happen is then the next level, that management team from that group gets together, figures out what are key things that they can do that contribute to these OKRs. And not all the OKRs may be relevant to them. Out of that 6, maybe only 3 are relevant. So they take those 3, they develop their own OKRs. Then with this focus, you also then say to the other teams, right, here are the company OKRs, here are some OKRs we've defined for, let's say, tech, right? Now, you and your individual teams, there must be things that you want to do that either advance our OKRs or the ones for the business. Tell us what they are. So I think it is important that you give the individual teams the opportunity to brainstorm their own ones. And eventually, and this was a really strong statement that came from our CEO too, he was sort of saying, it should get to a point where if you're a team member and you're working on something and you can't draw a link between what you're working on and one of the OKRs in the company, then you're well within your rights to sort of say, you know, what are we doing this for? Can someone remind me what we're doing this for? So yeah, it's supposed to be a powerful tool that people can align themselves on and make sure that what they're doing on really moves drivers. And it also shifts the focus away from just project-based and date-based delivery. And because you're given broad remit to move a specific metric, the idea is that teams and managers within a vertical would have the power to choose which initiatives they should prioritize based on which ones they think will have the biggest effect on moving that measurement. So if your goal is to increase customer engagement by 5%, right? The teams and the management within that vertical who's doing that should have the power to decide which initiatives they're working on that will give them maximum bang for their buck to get to that 5% for the year.
Now, for the benefit of people who are listening that aren't necessarily familiar with what OKRs are, I should probably mention that this is a concept of objectives and key results that we're talking about, and setting a clear direction, as you say, for the teams to understand what it is that they're chasing and how they measure success. And it's probably almost remiss of us to mention for our non-Australian audience, what is Flybys? Do you want to quickly give us a guide of that? Because I think that'll help for the audience to understand what the OKRs are.
Yeah, okay. So Flybuys is a loyalty program. They are probably the original loyalty program set up in Australia almost 20 years ago. And they were started by the Coles supermarket chain, which is one of two sort of major supermarket chains that more are entering into the market now, but there's really Coles and one other. And they're called Flybuys because at some point you were able to redeem your points for flights. You still are. And a couple of years ago, Flybuys broke off from Coles as an independent entity, and now Coles and Wesfarmers, another retail conglomerate, and they're shareholders in this company named Flybuys. And in its current form, it's 2 years old, but it's a 20-year-old brand name. And really, it's the ability to, when you go shopping at various retailers, you show your Flybuys card, you scan it, you get points for your purchases, and you're able to redeem those points in various ways.
Right. So then we can probably talk about now how you're thinking about structuring teams to support the delivery of those objectives, now that we have the context of what the organisation does, and then where your platform teams fit in that. Now, it's probably worthwhile mentioning you may have a different internal definition of what platform is, perhaps, to what we might traditionally refer to it as on this podcast. So we would typically be talking about platforms as a service, and that could be ERP, CRM, those sorts of things. I imagine you probably have those as well, but you may have a slightly different interpretation. So when we're using the word, we want to make sure we're not conflating it or misconstruing it. How would you describe it when you're talking about how you structure your engineering capability?
I think we could have consider platform teams as teams that developers probably specialize in a particular domain, right? Such as mobile, web, Salesforce, NetSuite, ERP, something like that. And who are ultimately going to become owners of the code base and the health of that individual system. And by de facto, by being owners of the code base, they're also owners of the experience that gets rolled out, right? So other teams might work on elements of the code base or platform that they're responsible for, but ultimately accountability for its security, its health, its risk, its disaster recovery belongs to this platform team. And that was one of the things that we were struggling with, which is why we kind of went down this path of dividing teams into mission-based streams and platform streams. One of the things we struggled with, actually there were a couple of things we struggled with. One, when you have this mix of diverse skills inside a team, for example, you have a team that has a whole bunch of API developers and then one mobile developer. Depending on the work, the nature of the work, sometimes that mobile developer is fully occupied, sometimes that mobile developer wasn't. So what do you do on those times when this developer isn't doing work? And if that mobile developer works on a very particular part of the app, so for example, just the consumer-facing part of the app, and maybe not, another section of the app which deals with interaction with customer service, for example, right? And somebody else in another team is dealing with that, then it's very hard for these two guys to work holistically on the code base in a way that they're not stepping on each other's feet, right? So there was this thing about resource utilization, and then the other consideration is ownership. There wasn't a real sense that when a team delivered something, that they actually owned the system to which they were putting the code into. It was more like they were kind of giving it to this part of the organization that was in charge of deployment, right? A very kind of traditional way of doing things, giving it to a deploy and release organization. And then if the developers are like, all right, let's just move on to the next thing. Let's develop the next feature. So for us, a key thing about making platform teams, I can take mobile as an example, is that Oh, the other thing too is that when teams are working on delivering features and initiatives, they're not always thinking, or they're not given the space and time to think about the ongoing, health and maintenance of the application. So to give you a good example, you're working in a particular feature in the iOS mobile app, right? During that time, Apple releases a new version of iOS and therefore releases a new bunch of functionality in the new libraries that come with it. You're not concerned with that, right? You just want to do your feature work. And then when you're done, you move on to the next feature and the next feature. And because you're only dealing within a specific part of the application too, you might not feel like you have the remit to change the entire code base because you just deal in these couple of screens and this kind of how it interacts with the API. So a platform team should be given the responsibility to sort of say, we are the guys who are in charge of that. And whilst there are people who might be doing various things that touching certain parts of our code base, we're the guys who are responsible for making sure that the app is to a state where when anybody wants to tap into it, they're always tapping into the latest, most healthy version of this app. And also they're not repeating themselves all the time. I mean, they're not writing bunches of code, which we know, Apple has just released a 2-liner that used to take 20 lines of code to write, So for me, these platform teams are these owners, these custodians, and there are different engagement models that they're going to have with these verticals to get work done, and we can talk about those in a second. But they would own the code base. They will enable other people to make changes to the code base, no problem, but ultimately they'll be responsible for it. So when it does get merged back in, they need to understand what it does, what the implications are, because ultimately they're going to own it when it goes out.
Right, and then I imagine you would have a bunch of these, call them platform teams for various different platforms, and you talked about the verticals. So what might the verticals be, and then perhaps we can talk about how they interact after that.
Yeah, so for us, our verticals are like, we have shareholders for which we do marketing activities for. So our shareholders are Coles and Wesfarmers. We have partners that we do business with. So these are some of the people that we do business with to burn points or to earn points outside of our shareholders, right? Then we have member services, so all the services that we do to make sure when our members use the app or scan their card or want to redeem points, that they can do that in a frictionless and easy way. And then we have, other businesses where we're trying to develop ways to market the insight that we collect on spending habits and things like that. So we have sort of 4 major LOBs. At REA, you could divide the business broadly into consumer, customer, and commercial, and overseas. Asia, I guess, was another sort of domain for us. Yeah, so those are in Flybys, there's sort of those 4 or 5 key areas, and then inside there would be different teams that would have slightly different focus on that LOB.
Right, and then you alluded to the fact that there's an interaction that happens between those, right? If you've got a vertical team chasing, let's call it whatever the next big thing is for your shareholder group.
Yeah, I think I'll probably preface this with the fact that this does require a trade-off, right? So we'll talk about the trade-off in a second, but modeling something like this does have a trade-off. We're doing it because we think the engagement in teams is going to be better, because when teams build something on a vertical, they feel like they've delivered some value and they get to see it released into the wild and they've done something. And the platform teams feel like they're actually custodians of something like an app or a website and all the code in there. And they know that they're responsible for making it the best experience that it could be for users and members and shareholders. And there are several engagement models. So one engagement model is, we know we're a vertical, we're delivering a feature. We know that it touches one of the platforms. So we have mobile platform, web platform, and identity platform at the moment. Identity is like dealing with how you log in and how you get identified when you join systems. More will come, but we've just started with these ones. So you say, like, I'm working on a feature, I have to do all this API development, but I know it has a mobile component. So either you have a mobile dev that has enough work in your team to be there full time, and they say, I can work on this piece, and you're going to review it, Mr. Platform Person, or Ms. Platform Person, you're gonna review it and then merge it back into the code base. Another engagement model would be somebody from that platform team, if they have capacity, will join your team and work alongside people there to do it. Or the other model is just you agree with the platform team on a certain time frame that they're going to work on it. So that's 3 models I can think of off the top of my head. Now, the trade-off with all those, of course, is there's more work in coordinating between all the parties, right? And as a result, I think we're exploring having an agile portfolio manager in our organization, because we already anticipate there's going to be a lot of touch points between different teams and lining up when that work needs to happen versus when people are expecting it to be delivered. It's going to be a little bit more of an overhead. But I think the general feeling is that trade-off is worth it when you trade it off against engagement, happiness, ownership, autonomy of role, all those other things that, we've been struggling with the past couple of months.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think about how I relate that to the team topologies work, and it almost sounds like a combination of either the interaction mode collaborating to deliver or as a service in terms of less about a subsystem, more about a platform interaction. Is that fair?
Yeah. And look, and I think it also places a lot more emphasis on the people in the delivery manager, delivery lead roles, right? That they also now need to recognize it's not just about leading a single team, it's also about communication amongst all these other teams and encouraging that. I mean, one of the things they talk about in team topology, right, and it's something I'm talking about later on tonight in LinkedIn, is the role of a delivery manager. They talk about that team topology, about the fact that it's very difficult to form close relationships with more than, say, 20 people or something, right? So if you're a team of 11 and you work with 5 other teams of 11 people, to be able to develop the relationships to get things done like you have in your own team becomes more increasingly difficult. However, your DL, who has a relationship with the other DL and another DL, and the numbers are smaller, they have more chance of sort of communicating and getting things organized on your behalf, And yeah, that's where I think some of that power comes in, relying more on the people who you charge with delivery to help out in that orchestration.
Yeah, I think imagine, sort of, at least in my experience, sort of managing that extraneous cognitive load can be quite challenging when you're talking about the number of interactions you need to have with other humans. What would be interesting to explore now, if you don't mind me sort of changing tack slightly, is an org design transformation of the scale you're talking about in what seems to be a relatively short period of time, if you've only been there sort of the period of time you have, is bound to have complications both in terms of thinking about the right types of skill sets you're going to need and people and interactions and ways of working, but also then attracting and retaining the right people. And I think it would be, I did a whole chapter on how you go about understanding the upcoming work and the types of work it is, whether it's sort of, innovation or if it's keeping the lights on, and then trying to find the right people to match the work that's in the pipeline. I'd like to explore, perhaps, as you're rebuilding, I imagine you're probably going to market for new people. How do you go about hiring? How have you been thinking about that? Do you sort of go, we need a hardcore, let's call it Salesforce developer that's got 3 years experience to fill a hole? Or is it more of a broader philosophical, what we need is people with a certain attitude, or is it blend? How do you sort of think about that?
Yeah, I think it depends on the domain, right? So you mentioned Salesforce. I mean, that is a very interesting one, because it is one that basically any developer could probably walk into a Salesforce dev role, right? And they just need to educate themselves about the Salesforce domain, right? Less so the technology or the underlying programming language, but more the domain. And they could get off the ground very quickly. That it's more of a challenge of they don't want to, for whatever reason. They tend to sort of like, I'm a Node.js developer and I'm going to die a Node.js developer. That kind of attitude. So it tends to be in some of those specialist areas, like data science areas or areas that deal with data, and Salesforce, and specialists like ERP systems, like your Dynamics and your NetSuites and your SAPs. You tend to hire very specialist things. But for everything else, I've had the most success, particularly at REA, with hiring people with the right attitude, right? They don't even need to know the particular language that we're talking about. or that they program in. They just need to demonstrate that they're somebody who has picked up lots of languages before and has this like enthusiasm and attitude towards the job. We even did this in my previous roles too. I find like we sort of artificially constrain ourselves a lot by hiring for specific roles. So this person is going to be an API dev. This person is going to be a front-end dev. Well, what we really should be hiring for is people who are willing to do all those things and learn progressively. So I might be an API dev now, but I'm quite open about the fact that I want to learn more front-end stuff. So, throw it at me and I will. And those are the types of people I find I've had the most success with. It's more of an attitude thing. It's this intellectual curiosity and a hunger to learn that makes them a success all the time. Because often they will go for these jobs, and because they're not experienced enough, they won't get them. But you give them the opportunity and they will just smash it out of the park. So personally, I think we're going through a bit of a renaissance now where we're sort of questioning what we need. And I think we're trying to look at these more kind of really passionate, really broad skill sets, but still technical, but not hiring for just a specialist. And personally, I would like to tap in, talking about that enthusiasm that people bring and the loyalty that comes with giving people an opportunity at something. I mean, I think, one of the programs at REA they had about getting women returning to work from maternity, right? Who or women been out of the workforce for whatever reason, either maternity or whatever reason. The confidence probably has slipped a little bit in their skills, right? But they have the foundations for it. They just need somebody to take a shot on them. And in REA, it's worked out phenomenally. And I would love to see something like that in our current organization where we just, welcome back women who are new to the workforce and recognize that, you're not going to have all the skills on the resume for the job at the time, but I can see that you've got the potential to pick it up, and all you need is just the opportunity and a little space to do the right learning and the support to get there. And also, Shane, at REA, there was also some people that we get from the call center, right, to come and work in tech. And some of those people have just smashed it out of the park. And it's because they know all the problems that our customers face. They have all the business context. What they don't have is the tech chops. They come onto this program, we send them off somewhere, they get to learn how to code in 3 months, they come back and they're just fantastic, right?
Yeah.
People have never been formally trained in computers, science or programming are coming back and just smashing it. And I love those kinds of stories. And I'd love to hire more of those kinds of people.
So I'm just almost coming up on time, but I'm kind of reflecting on the conversation and thinking about, this structuring around a mission and then distilling that down into teams based around that, supported by platform groups, the interaction between those, and then the type of people that it takes to deliver on that sort of stuff. And I would normally say, what are your 3 learnings? And maybe I'll come to that in a second, but I've just taken away from what you've just told me. It almost feels like the 3 learnings for me are finding people to join your organization where, this is obviously number 1, the opportunity to earn, right? You're getting paid to do the role because you're delivering value. But I think the other 2 that come out to me is the opportunity to learn. And I think that comes back to doesn't matter what language it is, I get to learn something, or I'm coming back into the workforce, or I'm moving, as you say, moving from the call center into a development role, and I have this opportunity and this sort of, I call it opportunity to learn, but it's kind of that attitude and aptitude, to want to learn. And then the last one I picked up was something you said earlier about particularly in the platform teams, this concept of ownership. And so I think the third one is opportunity to own. So I've got opportunity to earn, learn, and own is kind of like this kind of 3-circle Venn, if you like, of how to find the right people to fit into the sort of organization you're talking about. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, I think it's very fair. Yeah, and I mean, ownership you could probably, extrapolate a little bit into a couple of different dimensions. It's ownership of the solution that gets implemented. It's ownership of the design of being able to design what you think is the right solution, and use those big beautiful brains that we hire for in the first place in these teams. And then it's also ownership in owning the result of what gets delivered as well. So knowing that when you release the code and it's in the hands of your users, not just saying, well, that was great, job well done, but also listening to what they're saying. And when they're coming back and they're not happy, taking that on board, right? Owning it and saying, right, we thought this was going to be a great solution. or have some real value. Turns out it didn't. But what can we learn from that, and how do we apply it now to the next thing we're going to deliver? Owning the result.
Yeah, owning the result. And I think it's also, you described OKRs earlier, right? So in some respects, it's also owning the how.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right. So you've just talked about a fair depth of work that you've been delivering in a very short period of time, and kind of taking lessons from your previous life and that of your CTO counterpart. Have you thought about top 3 tips? And you've just been through, let's call it a not insignificant transformation within your organization in a short period of time. And I know you're still going through it, so I don't expect you've necessarily nailed it yet. But, early days, what do you think your, sort of top 3 observations or tips for people who are thinking about embarking on the same journey? What would they be?
Yeah, far from nailing it. We're very early on, but, we're getting there. But, if I was to think about 3 things, I think it's when you go through recruitment and you're recruiting people, look for those enthusiastic people, because you're going to need a lot of energy, and be transparent with them about where you are in your journey at the time, what your vision is for getting there, and how they're going to be a part of it. And that's the opportunity that they have joining you, right? I think it's important, to be transparent about where you are, but by sharing your vision of where you think you're going to be, you also articulate the opportunity that they have to participate in the journey. So I think that's one big tip.
I imagine then that the people that you're talking to, you're interviewing them, I imagine it's pretty important just from the perspective of you haven't got this nailed yet and you're going on a journey, and they need to know that coming in, right?
Yes. And also to be clear that we expect them to be a part of it too, right? Yeah, we want you to bring your experiences from places that you've worked and help steer the ship.
Cool. All right. So number 1, being transparent with both what the process you're going through, but also the opportunity that lies at the end. What's number 2, mate?
Number 2, I think, would probably be look, people really resonate with having a sense of belonging. They need to understand where they sit in the organization. If they've had kind of unclear or floating reporting lines before, you'll often find they're even more unhappy than others in the organization. So I think what I've come to realize is that, having a sense of belonging and knowing that you're reporting into somebody who, gives a damn about who you are, what you do, and knows, roughly where you want to head with your career is really, really important. And probably is the thing that, when you're making change, is one of the most important wins that you could get to get people over to your side of the fence, is winning over those people by giving them strong reporting lines and a sense of belonging.
It's interesting, I look at that. I've seen 2 different spectrums for that. One is the sort of traditional, very rigid, multiple level hierarchy and very clear reporting line, which kind of you start to see people bucking the trend and going, we want to flatten that out. And then the alternative, which is I've also seen, we don't have reporting lines. We're a flat structure, and people can pick who they want to report to, or, people kicking up and saying, well, I'll only report to a software engineer because they understand what I do. And I'm sure you've seen that as well.
Yeah, I think you could probably open up a whole new podcast on that one, Shane. But yeah, look, I've seen it both. I'm in the camp of, I don't think the person needs to be technically better than anyone reporting it. I think you just need to be a good manager. And by that, I mean somebody who's also a good people person. And if you can empathize with what work they do, if you can empathize with the struggles that they have, if you can have an understanding of what the person wants to do in terms of their career and what are some of the blockers that are preventing them from getting there, and that you have the network of people that you can talk to help solve that problem and demonstrate that you're dealing with it, that's all anybody ever wants. I mean, take it from if you and I were an engineer, right, and I was reporting into somebody who I knew was smarter than I, but they never gave me the time of day, and I never got to tap into, any of those learnings that they have or coaching that they have. If they didn't coach me or mentor me, then they're just as good as not having anybody there, right? I would much prefer have that person who's really engaged with me and wants to know what I want and how I can add value to the organization, rather than somebody who's technically brilliant and understands all the struggles I have from daily work, but doesn't really care about me beyond that, you know?
Yeah, sort of that someone who's got your back and is willing to listen and has your best interest at heart, but also has the time to help and the personality to be able to achieve that as well. Okay, all right. So I've pinned you for 2. Let's try number 3. What's your third tip, mate?
I guess the third one is that, moving to a more agile style of working means change. There's always a natural resistance by both people enacting the change and people who are subject to the change. It's always going to be a challenge there, and there's always going to be a natural fear that comes with it. I would suggest that changing your organization to go down a more agile path, already there's a lot of material in there where you can describe what's in it for the people, right? And you don't need to dig too deep to come up with some compelling reasons for the organization to embrace it. Reasons such as, mastery over your own work, the ability to solution your own work, to own your own work, to see the direct effect of stuff that you publish as a team, that you deploy as a team. All that kind of stuff is really compelling argument for the change.
All right. So just in summary, I think it would be, number 1, be transparent about the journey that you're on and the opportunity that presents. Number 2, belonging and someone with whom has your best interest at heart. And then number 3, don't be afraid of an agile transformation, because the benefit is obvious, but selling the benefit should be about what the material benefit is to the individual, not some esoteric, broader, abstract concept. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
All right, mate. I appreciate it. We're right on time, so I'll let you go. If anybody wants to reach out and learn a little bit more about what's going on, how should they find you, mate?
Probably LinkedIn might be the best. Just ping me on LinkedIn, send me a message on LinkedIn, or ask to connect. I'm more than happy. And I like to think I'm a pretty approachable guy, Shane.
Well, I mean, you took up my offer to go on a podcast, so you can't be half bad. All right, mate. I'll put a link to your LinkedIn profile in the show notes. Thanks again, and we'll chat again soon.
Thank you very much, Shane. It was a pleasure.
You've been listening to Platform Diaries with Shane Williams. For more information or to contact Shane, please visit shanewilliams.com.au. Until next time, thanks for listening.